Thanks again, everyone. Hello, everyone. We're just going to take a minute here and make sure everybody's admitted in and can join us. We got just a few more, it looks like, that are joining us today. And then we'll get started. This kind of overcast day here in Morgantown today. I hope it's brighter where all of our panelists are. Just waiting on one more to join us and then we'll get started. All right. Well, hello. My name is Renee Nicholson. For those of you who don't know me, I am the director of WVU's Humanities Center. And, oh, we got a few late joiners here. Excellent. Again, Renee Nicholson, and I direct the WVU Humanities Center, and I'm here along with Danica Ryan, who is a career specialist from WVU's Career Services. And I'm happy to welcome you to the inaugural Humanities at Work event. Today it is Book It, Careers in Book Publishing and Promotion. And this is the first in a year-long series of humanities-centered career events. Today, I'm really just so honored to be hosting 4 fantastic women who in some way work with books, and as someone who is a published author, this makes these 4 women something like saints to me. So thank you for all that you do for books and writers. If you're like me, books mattered in your life, and so a life that connects deeply with books may speak to you on that deep and essential level. And so I'm hoping today we can learn more about some of the careers that you could pursue working in book publishing and promotion. So today I'm very happy to introduce, and I'm just going to go in alphabetical order, Rebecca Colsworthy, who is Senior Acquisitions Editor at SUNY Press. Her areas of acquisition include literary and cultural studies, women and gender studies, queer studies, Latin American, Caribbean, and Latinx studies, African American studies, and education. She is the author of Returning the Gift, Modernism and the Thought of Exchange from Oxford University Press, and co-editor with Peter Nichols of How Abstract Is It? Critical or Thinking Capital Now from Routledge. She is on the editorial board of, is that MAUSS, M-A-U-S-S International, has taught at New York University, University at Albany, SUNY, and Skidmore College, and has worked for a handful of years in nonprofit fundraising and communications. She holds a PhD in English from Cornell. Next is Lacey and Dunham. She is a writer, editor, and arts educational professional. Currently, she is the director of education programs at the Penn Faulkner Foundation, and previously she worked at 826 DC and Politics and Prose. She has served stints at the journals A Public Space and Electric Literature, been on judges panels for the Minnesota Book Awards, the National Award for Arts Writing, and the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, and presented at Georgetown University, Smithsonian, Barrel House, and AWP, among others. She has edited several anthologies of youth writing and has received recognition in the New York Times Magazine, the Washington Post, and on NPR. Lacey is currently the fiction editor at Necessary Fiction and a contributing editor at Story. Her writing has been published at Plowshares, The Normal School, The Southwest Review, Witness, Pigeon Pages, McSweeney's Internet Tendency, and Cheap Pop, and has been nominated to the Best American Short Stories. Lacey is a first-generation college graduate. Next is Sarah Giorgi, who is the managing editor at West Virginia University Press and the owner of Giorgi Editorial Services. At the press, she works with authors, copy editors, and typesetters to publish fiction, creative nonfiction, and scholarly books on higher education, Appalachian studies, history, geography, and the environment. She earned a bachelor's degree in English and philosophy from New Mexico State University and a master's degree in professional writing and editing from West Virginia University. I also want to thank Sarah for her amazing work on my book. So little extra thanks there tagged on to the bio. And last but certainly not least, Ellen Whitfield balances her understanding of the other side of the desk, which I love, when it comes to media pitching with a true love and an avid bibliophile. She was part of the journalism community for more than 7 years, working at respected print and online media outlets, including the Dallas Morning News, the Advocate newspapers of Baton Rouge, and the New Orleans, where she coordinated book coverage, and the Waco Tribune Herald, and others. Her experience on the editorial side of the travel community and lifestyle sections of the newspapers, along with her social and online media savviness, and I just lost my space, guys, I'm so sorry. Social and online media savviness as a popular bookstagrammer is to the benefit of authors across genres. She has an eye for design and a passion for detail. Ellen provides daily mentorship to the Books Forward team and trains incoming publicists to provide expanded services to their growing and beloved Books Forward family. A Louisiana State University graduate, Ellen lives in the Bayou State with her newspaper executive husband, bright and spirited daughter, we know where she gets that from, and an ever-growing collection of 550 books. So 4 great women. I'll go ahead and we'll start with Rebecca. And she's going to tell us a little bit about who she is, how she came to her job, and a little bit of just her career path.
Thank you so much for having me. Can everyone hear me okay? I hope not. Okay, thank you. So you already got quite a bit of my bio, and I'll try to keep it brief since Q&A can often be the most sort of valuable part of these sorts of things. But so to give you my quick educational background is that my my undergrad degree, I have a BA in English and what was then called Women's Studies, but has since, I think rightly, become Gender and Sexuality Studies from Brown. And then, as Renee mentioned, I have an MA and PhD in English literature from Cornell. So perhaps of note is that I did take 3 years off between my undergrad and grad, which is a decision I will say I have never, ever regretted. If some are thinking about pursuing graduate school. The first year I was a research assistant to 3 professors and at my undergrad institution, and helped a couple of them with things like checking citations and bibliographic entries on their own scholarly books. And honestly babysat to make ends meet on top of that. And then I worked for 2 years as an administrative assistant at a small feminist nonprofit in New York City. So basically for the last 20 years, I've sort of toggled between parts of academia and the nonprofit sector. After I finished my PhD, I had a 3-year position as a postdoctoral fellow at a master's program at NYU that was interdisciplinary. My own sort of scholarly and book interests have always crossed over into a lot of different fields, and that was a position that entailed teaching. And then from there, I transitioned back into the nonprofit sector and was working in fundraising and communications at an organization called the Harlem Children's Zone, which is a large education anti-poverty nonprofit in New York City. I now live in Albany, New York, and when I moved here for personal reasons, I basically had to start over professionally. So I was sort of patching things together, teaching a course at SUNY Albany, and then doing some freelance writing for the organization that I used to work for. And it was genuinely by pure chance that in summer of 2017, there happened to be a listing for an acquisitions editor. And I'll just say a word about that in a second, at SUNY Press, where I'm now a senior acquisitions editor. So I've been with the press for almost 5 years. I mean, I always joke that when I moved to upstate New York, it wasn't like, oh, obviously I'll go into scholarly publishing. There's such a hub of publishing in upstate New York. It really was fortuitous. I was hired to acquire books in gender studies, which has always been an area of investment for me. Education, which I was sort of, had been working in education nonprofit. Obviously, having gone to grad school, I'm invested in higher ed and all that. And what was then being called Hispanic studies, and we're calling it some other things now for various reasons. And that was sort of like, well, I can geek out about that, sure. What I'll say about my job, because what does one even say about one's job, is that in some ways it's more like my previous work than I necessarily would have anticipated. So I think we often, I think the acquisitions part of my title is important. So I think we often think of editors as, sitting and reading manuscripts all day and scribbling marginalia. And the reality is that scholarly publishing, in which both Sarah and I work, though West Virginia does many trade books too, is sort of its own monster. And so, the books that we publish go through a very particular review and evaluation process from the time a proposal is submitted to the time the book appears in the world. And so, while I do a lot of giving of feedback of different kinds, my real job is to advocate for a book and an author and really shepherd it through this process and send it out for evaluation, or what's called peer review. When the manuscript comes in, every book goes before an editorial board for approval. So there's sort of a vetting process that entails a lot of communication and a lot of sort of emotional labor. I work with a large number of books per year, which means I deal with a lot of people, often very anxious people, because books, no matter how professional, are also deeply personal objects to their creators and everyone who comes into contact with them. So in many ways, there's a lot of communication in my job, and I really do. It's a lot of putting out fires about, books, not actual life or death, but I think the extent to which I really am working with people and a lot of different personalities is probably the thing that's most surprising about my job, and so kind of worth underscoring. And I'll stop there, but I'm happy to go into greater detail about absolutely anything.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And then Lacey, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and your path to get there?
Yeah, absolutely. That was fascinating for me to hear, Rebecca, and I'm already learning so much as a fellow panelist. So I hope this is a treat for everyone who's also in the audience today. And thank you, Renee, and to West Virginia University Humanities for having us. So as Renee mentioned, I am a first-generation college student. So no one in my immediate or extended family had a college education until I went to college. And where I grew up was a very rural area in the Midwest, although I live now in Washington, D.C. And it was not expected and fairly uncommon for anyone I knew growing up, including my fellow peers, to go to college. And so what this really meant is I had no idea what I was doing, and didn't really have maybe the right supports, and certainly did not really have any direction. So I kind of stumbled into my university, which is Hollins University. It is a small women's liberal arts college in Roanoke, Virginia. It is a private university. I ended up going there because of the two schools I applied to, and I got into both. They had a creative writing program for undergrads that was quite robust. They also have an MFA program in writing. And they gave me a lot of financial aid money. And I was like, great, this is what I'm going to do. So, I ended up majoring in English with my concentration in creative writing, and that was kind of the dream major. And then I did sort of a practical major as a double major. Throughout college, I actually had a work study job all 4 years. I also did a couple of unofficial kind of paid under the table campus jobs, and then also worked off campus. And because I'd come into the university with some AP credits from high school and also doubled up on my course load, I was able to graduate in 3.5 years. Which, Hollins is a very kind of traditional school with a lot of legacy students who come from much higher income backgrounds. And so I think they weren't, frankly, very prepared to support first-gen students. And so while it made a huge amount of financial sense for me to leave school in 3.5 years, there was a lot of resistance to that from my advisors and faculty on campus. But I ended up doing it anyway. That meant that I was graduating at a time, mid-year when all of my peers were not graduating. Hollins is small enough, it does not do mid-year graduations. And so I graduated in December of 2004, although I didn't officially matriculate until that May, and kind of flailed about for a bit. I, once again, having kind of no prior guidance, really had no idea what I was doing. I knew what I liked. I knew what my interests were. I had always loved books, had always had an affinity for writing and for creativity. I kind of knew what I wanted to do with that, but wasn't really aware of the full plethora of jobs kind of within creative fields, and certainly had no idea how to go about getting any of those jobs. So after kind of flailing about for a bit, and there's definitely some fun stories in there, I really started to kind of think about, well, what are the jobs of people that I grew up with? What do they have? And so folks who had some type of education were often teachers, especially if they were women, a lot of daycare providers. Walmart is the largest employer in my home county. My childhood best friend's husband is actually a manager at Walmart. Bank teller is another pretty common job, just what my childhood best friend does. Working in agriculture is another huge thing, and my father is a farmer. Working at the foundry or in construction, if you wanted something really stable with solid benefits, a lot of people became police officers, either on the county or the state level. And if you wanted something really stable with benefits and also get to travel, then a lot of folks would join the armed services. And so I graduated college and I was looking at this list and I was like, well, none of these are really book related, except teaching, maybe kind of. And so I then transitioned after college into becoming a teacher. So I worked in DC as a teacher here in the public schools for a few years, and simultaneously was also working in a bookstore because it felt important to me to kind of retain some aspect of this identity I feel like I had found and discovered as an undergrad that I was really able to feed through my experience as a student, which is again something that no one in my family had the opportunity to do. I have no idea how I balanced those two jobs, and frankly burnt out on teaching. It's a very high demand career. It takes an enormous emotional toll. I, as a writer, I did not write at all during that period. There was just no time. So I think as you are thinking about where do you want to go and what do you want to do, I think, consider, what type of career will also give you an opportunity to maybe do something that you really love. For me, teaching was not giving me that time and space, but because I had worked in a bookstore as just a frontline book retail employee for a while, I was actually able, after I left teaching, to parlay that into a position working with a pretty renowned bookstore here in DC called Politics and Prose. And so transitioned into a full-time book selling role at that bookstore. And around about that time, and I know I look very young, but this certainly does age me, the owners were like, there's this new thing called social media. Can you help us figure it out? Like, you're a young person. So I was suddenly put in charge of the store's external communication, primarily through Facebook and Twitter, and at that time Foursquare, which really is harkening back to the dark days of the internet. And from that, I actually then became the store's first marketing director when new owners came in and they began to really think about how did they want to get the word out there about the amazing array of author events that the store was consistently offering, classes, specialized literary trips, and then also just to create positive relationships with customers through the bookstore to really highlight, this is an independent bookstore that is, personable, it's a cultural hub. We're very different from perhaps other retailers online who are selling books as just mere products. And so I had the opportunity to really be a part of thinking what that marketing strategy was going to look like for the bookstore, and then really kind of helping them launch that. And then at some point, I transitioned and actually combined my teaching experience with my publishing and kind of book retail experience into the arts administration, arts education space, which is where I've been now for just shy of 10 years. Arts education, arts administration was really kind of combining those two aspects of early things I had done in my career. But I think self-evolution is a constant thing. As I think about my own self and what I want out of the next stage of my life, thinking maybe continue with arts administration in books, but, maybe not quite as closely tied to K-12 education. So I want to put that out there because I think my perception always, when I was much younger, was that you fell into a career and then you just had it all figured out. And I think that's absolutely not true. And there's no reason you can't reinvent yourself and find kind of different niches where you really fit. So just a little bit about what I do, because I think arts administration and arts education doesn't mean anything to most people who aren't in it. So I have a real knack, and this has been a pretty consistent thing throughout my career, of entering organizations that are in some type of transition. And so, for me, that means in my current role and then in roles I've held in the past, it's really been about building capacity for organizations or programs, professionalizing systems, and thinking strategically. And so in my current job, what that really means is I oversee all of the literary education programs that the organization does within DC, and specifically within DC public and charter schools. So that is author visits, that is writing workshops, and that is something called a writer in residence program, which is connecting professional writers who are teaching artists to kind of long-term partnerships with educators in the schools. There's a heavy focus in the work that I do, and this is very important to my team and I, on representation within the authors that we work with, because the population of students in DC is majority low income students, and that intersects with the demographic of mostly Black and Brown students. We feel it's really, really important to make certain that those authors that we are bringing into schools are reflective and representative of students' identities. And so that's been an enormous strategic shift within my programming in the last 4 to 5 years. So much like Rebecca, lots of relationship building. In my case, I'm connecting two very different worlds, right? The world of public K-12 education and the world of authors and writing. Many times those worlds have very different needs, and you have to kind of speak to people in two different languages. I also have to stay abreast of a lot of industry developments. So that's, both within publishing in the literary world, but that's also within public education. And I think right now in this cultural moment, there's a really kind of interesting confluence and connection that's happening between those two worlds because of censorship that we're seeing happen, primarily targeting public school libraries. And so it's kind of a rare moment where those two worlds are really coming together, and I'm sort of sitting on the bridge between them and having to navigate and help both the authors I work with and the educators and students I work with navigate these issues. I also am responsible for overseeing the department strategy in my role as an arts administrator and arts educator. So it's really thinking about, what are we doing? Who are we doing it with? How are we going to go about doing it? When are we doing it? Building in breaks for my team and I has been a goal this year, right? We're not going to do programming in January because we need a moment off. Problem solving is, I think, probably the other biggest thing in addition to relationships, which is a lot like Rebecca referenced of putting out fires. So, how am I going to make this work? How am I going to make this work on a small budget? How am I going to get thing X to person Y? And how can I bend the rules just enough to kind of squeak in or kind of get away with some things, which is quite important when you're working with kind of a large bureaucratic system like a school district. Program evaluation is a huge part of what I do. So, what is the impact of these programs? Lots of logistics. I'm very, very tied to my Google Calendar, but also to our database. And then as the department director, of course, management. So really, thinking about how to grow and develop and support my team of fellow book lovers and sometimes others, because I do have the unique position of interfacing with authors. I think I am in a place where I sometimes get to hear authors' direct experiences, sometimes great and sometimes not so great with the publishing industry. And so kind of, doing some emotional labor to help them work through some of the challenges or joys that they're experiencing. I'm happy to answer any questions later as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then Sarah, why don't you take us on your particular journey into book publishing?
All right, I'd be happy to. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, and it's really interesting to listen to what folks have to say. And I find myself nodding along as there's a fair bit of overlap in some of my experience. So I will put in another plug for first generation students. I'm also a first generation college student. I went to college in my hometown, so sort of like WVU in Morgantown. I went to New Mexico State University, which is a land grant college in southern New Mexico. And I had always been really interested in books as well. So I majored in English, but then I also happened to take a philosophy class and I liked it. So I took another one and a couple more, and I really got into philosophy. So I thought, okay, I'm going to be a philosophy professor. I've got it figured out. This is totally what I want to do. And I took, unlike Rebecca, I took no time between undergrad and graduate school. And I applied for grad school my senior year of college, and I went off for a PhD in philosophy at the University of Southern California. With an ounce of reflection, it didn't take me long at all. I was there for a year. And I said, okay, no, this isn't actually for me. Because I didn't take any time off, and being a first generation college student, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. And I figured out pretty quickly with a little bit of reflection that I didn't actually want to teach. So PhD, becoming a professor wasn't really a good fit for me. So I left after a year, but this would have been spring, summer 2009. So some of you will know that there was a recession that started in 2008, and it was far from over in 2009. So I spent quite a time just in any job that I could find, part-time jobs, temp jobs. I finally found full-time work at a library. So I worked in a library for a little while in a rare book and manuscript reading room, which was heaven for, a book lover. It was a lot of fun, but it wasn't exactly a career position. So I knew that I needed to move on from it at some point. Briefly thought about getting a master's degree in library science and thought about becoming a librarian. But then for personal reasons, I wound up here in Morgantown in 2012. So sort of like Rebecca, I found myself having to start over and figure out what I was going to do. So in my senior year of college, though, in the spring semester, so after I had applied and been accepted to grad school, knew I was going to do this PhD in philosophy, I took a course in the tech writing program. It was a concentration offered by the English department at NMSU, and I took just one class and I really, really liked it, but I thought I had it all figured out, so I didn't really think much more about it at that point. But it was a class that stuck with me. And so when I got here to Morgantown, I thought, that really stuck with me. It informed some of my hobbies over the last handful of years. So maybe this is something I should pursue further. And I found out that WVU has this program, both undergrad and master's program in professional writing and editing. So I pursued that. I moved to Morgantown in 2012. I did that program from 2013 to 2015. And, having come off of a recession and been worried about the sorts of jobs that I could get and that kind of thing, I focused primarily on technical writing and editing, thinking that it was the more pragmatic choice that kind of regardless of where I wound up in life, that I could probably find a job someplace. I was a little worried about book publishing, for example. Like, as much as I was interested in going into book publishing, I wasn't going to wind up in New York City. I'm living in Morgantown, West Virginia. So I focused on technical writing and editing, but I took my one opportunity to get into book publishing, which was to intern at WVU Press while I was a grad student. Once I graduated, I went up to Pittsburgh and I worked for a couple of years as a tech editor and really enjoyed that work quite a bit. But then, to my surprise and just utter delight, the position here at WVU Press came open, the managing editor role. So I applied for it, and the internship helped me land the role. So here I am, and I've been here for just about 5 years now. And it's been great. So I will talk just super briefly about what I do, because it's sort of the tail end of the work that Rebecca does. So acquisitions editors find manuscripts to be published. They find books to be published. And then in my role as managing editor, I work in it. We're a small press. We're 5 full-time people. If I were at a larger press, I would be working in the department known as EDP, editing, design, and production. And that's where we take manuscripts and we move them from manuscript stage into bound book, or in some cases, it's going to be an ebook or an open access book online, but in many cases, the physical bound book. So I work a lot with manuscripts. So of course I work with authors as well, but I'm doing much more of the nitty gritty down in the weeds work with manuscripts. In some cases, copy editing them, but also preparing them for typesetting or cleaning up work and overseeing work that freelance copy editors have done on our books. I also look over typeset page proofs to make sure that no errors have been introduced in the design and layout of the books. And if our books, for our scholarly books, some of our books have indexes. And so I will proofread and edit those indexes when they come in, and do a lot of the down in the weeds sorts of work with the books to make sure that they go smoothly from that manuscript stage to printed book. I would say that the most unique thing that maybe I didn't really realize when I was thinking about careers in book publishing, the most unique thing about my role is that it's a lot of project management. So I actually do far less and a lot more project management. So I'm responsible for assigning schedules to all of our books and ensuring that authors and the people that I'm working with or myself, that we meet the deadlines at various stages so that we can get a book out on time, because we announce when the book will be published and then we need to get it out by that point, or else there are usually a bunch of problems if we don't manage to get it out on time. So I would say, yeah, aside from working with manuscripts down in the weeds, that the project management piece of it is one of the more interesting things to me, and something that I didn't necessarily expect when I first got into book publishing.
Thank you. It is interesting to find out all the intricacies and the hands-offs, and we're starting to see that here. And then once you have a book in hand, that bound book that Sarah has taken to you, you might work with someone like Ellen. And Ellen, if you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, of course. I was going to say that's a very good lead in, the way it was kind of stacked. I know it was alphabetical, but it worked really well timeline wise. So I am actually the publicity director at Books Forward, which is a position that I very accidentally fell into. I went to college not really knowing what I wanted to do. I think I took like one pre-med course and did poorly. So I kind of figured out journalism was what I wanted to do my junior year. But at that point, I would have had to stay in college an extra year to get that actual journalism degree. So instead, I joined the student paper and just went for more of a general communications degree, which worked out really well for me. I ended up working at several newspapers after college. And then once I had a kid, I realized that being a copy editor and working until 1 a.m. on nights, weekends, holidays was not really cohesive with a new schedule with a newborn. So I started trying to think about, what else can I do? And, looking at jobs, trying to figure out, okay, am I going to shift careers entirely? Is there something that's, still journalism related? And happened to know a friend of a friend who worked with books. And I had always been a very big reader. So, my friend reached out to me and was like, hey, I know you've been thinking about changing jobs, and there's this company that my friend runs, and they work with books. And so I was like, yeah, let's do it. And I didn't really know a lot about career opportunities, in books, in publishing. I feel like the only job I knew of in books was kind of like what Sarah does, like editing, and I didn't really think a lot about the process behind, how a book gets made and how it gets out into the world. So I kind of went into the interview like, yeah, I can edit. I'm a copy editor, but it's actually a book publicity company. So, like Renee was saying, I kind of, once the publisher is, pretty much in final edits of the book, we start thinking about, okay, how are we going to help this book get into the world? How are we going to help it get into the hands of readers, get on reading lists, things like that. And so that's pretty much what I do now. I started as a publicist in 2017, and I'm the publicity director now. So I still work on select campaigns, but most of my job is, also like Sarah, is project management. I oversee all the publicists on our team, and kind of help guide them and make sure they're meeting our internal goals, and work with them on communicating with authors and things like that. But I also get to do cool stuff like this. I get to go to book events with the American Library Association, or VoucherCon, which is a mystery authors convention, and things like that. And I do a lot of in-house work to spread the word about Books Forward and about, the company, to try and get new clients. And, I also get to head up fun things like our influencer newsletter for reviewers and influencers who read and review books, to try and, help spread the word about the books that our clients are writing. And I also get to head up our pro bono program so that we can reach out to, marginalized authors and, help them get their books out into the world and spread the word about their books. So it's something that's really enjoyable that, I kind of fell into, didn't know existed, but got really, really lucky that I just happened to want to switch careers at a time when there was an opening at a company that would be perfect for me. So it's a little bit of, I don't like, anytime somebody asks me what I do, I'm like, oh, I do PR for authors, and people are like, oh, that's a thing. Yeah. So a lot of publishers have in-house publicity companies, but authors will often hire us to help with those efforts, or reach different communities, or, some smaller publishers just don't have a marketing program. And so that's kind of where they'll hire us to step in, supplement those efforts, and do what they can to get the word out about their book and kind of help build their author platforms.
Awesome. I feel like I've gone through the journey of a book just listening to you guys. It's been great. I'm going to ask a question or two, and I may, Danica might, and this is to kind of get the Q&A going, and audience members, drop your questions in the chat. I'll be moderating those, and we'll ask them. And I just use that way so that it doesn't get like people talking over each other, and just try to streamline it. But do ask your questions. I really want this to be about what you want to know. So my first question is sort of a like, okay, so I sort of looked into this, and I didn't know I could do this. And now many of you are actually hiring other people to work under you, right? And so you're looking at resumes all the time. And if I'm somebody, I've seen students in here, I've got a degree in English, I've got a degree in philosophy, I've got a degree in history, I have a degree in women and gender studies or art history. I've probably missed one in there. How do I show those skills on my resume? What are the things that you would be looking for if you're going to hire me? Or what would you recommend to a friend who wants to get into a job like yours, highlight on their resume if they're coming from a humanities background?
I'm happy to jump in. I have to hire like 5 to 7 people every year, and just wrapping up that process currently, so it's fresh in my mind. I think that one of the biggest missteps that I see actually is folks who get so excited about the opportunity of the position with the type of organization that Penn Faulkner is, a literary organization, that they forget that they're still applying for a job, right? And so almost, most cover letters I get start out saying, I've loved books since I was 2 years old, or I've been a reader since I could open up a book. And that's wonderful. And I kind of inherently expect that you have some excitement or passion for book if you are interested in working for a literary nonprofit, as opposed to, say, a hedge fund, where undoubtedly you could make much more money. So that, to me, doesn't need to be explicitly stated. Like, at the end of the day, I want to know what specific skills you are bringing to the table that's going to really sync up with the needs of the position. I think for the roles that I hire for, it really depends kind of specifically what those skills are. For our kind of entry level position, I really need to see that you can handle the people side, helping us manage and continue those relationships with authors and with educators, but that you can also handle and are willing to work on the admin side, right? It's not just enough to have a passion for reading. And then because of the emphasis we have on working and uplifting and amplifying voices of writers of color, being able to really show a explicit and specific commitment to DEIJ principles is very important. So those kind of, for me, are the things I look for.
And jump in, Rebecca.
I was just going to say that I think one thing that's important to bear in mind is that everything that Lacey is saying is presumably in the job ads and also on the organization's website, right? So the sort of, I think the kind of unspoken part of that is that your resume, and I'm sure Danica can tell you all this too, but that your resume and cover letter really should be tailored to the position and even explicitly use some of the language that you see in the job description. So, be assured that you don't just have to know all of these things, but it really is, cover letters are kind of what I would call performative documents, right? You're both telling the reader what they need to know about you, but you're also sort of showing that you can do the particular job that's being asked of you. And especially, I think, when you're coming from undergrad or coming from, some other educational context, or maybe you're shifting jobs or career paths, often you're proving yourself and selling yourself in a certain way in a cover letter that shows, I see what's being asked of me in this job ad, and I can match my experience and background to what's being asked of me in a way that lets you know I can do this position. When I personally made a really big leap from having, from being in academia to, when I made the leap to working then in fundraising and communications, I went from basically being a professor to being an executive assistant. And that was the sort of move I had to make to then kind of climb up a different ladder. But part of what helped me do that actually wasn't my degree. If anything, my degrees worked against me in making that transition. Was that the head of fundraising, the head of development in the organization I was going to, liked my writing in the correspondence that I had to send her, and that was a huge part of the job that I would be doing, right? And so I sort of presented myself in a way that said she can serve this role and what we need. And so And a lot of that is picking up on cues and the language that you see in job ads.
Great. And if none of the others are going to jump in on this one, I'm getting some in on the chat that I'm excited to ask you guys. So here's one that's, really like, where do you get started? And this is, I'm a recent graduate of WVU's Professional Writing and Editing graduate program, looking for a career connected to books and the written word. Any suggestions?
Maybe I'll jump in here as a grad from the MA and PWE. I think it depends a little bit on the sort of work that you want to do with books. If you're interested in doing the sort of work that I do, I would highly recommend a couple of resources for you that will, I think, help jumpstart. So if you're interested in copy editing, I definitely recommend reading The Subversive Copy Editor by Carol Fisher-Saller, and I can throw that in the chat after I'm done speaking here. And also The Copy Editor's Handbook by Amy Einstein. I'm going to blank on the last name, and then another person, like I say, I'll put it in the chat. But I think those are two excellent places to sort of fill in some very specific book copy editing experience that you might not have gotten in coursework in PWE, which might focus, for example, more on tech editing. And then, from there, you can think about, so I have on the side, I also have a freelance copy editing business, and you can potentially consider starting to gain a little bit of experience by doing some copy editing work, maybe for friends and family, getting a little bit of experience there, and then potentially start, sending queries out to folks. If this is work you're interested in, you can send queries to me because I'm quite frequently looking for freelance copy editors. But certainly internships, I think the pandemic has opened up the opportunity for more remote and paid internships. I mean, internships are tricky in some ways because so often they are unpaid, and that's a serious equity issue. But where they're paid, and now with the pandemic that many of them have gone remote, I think that's a nice way to break into an organization and gain some experience, particularly those that offer a variety of experience. If you're not interested in manuscript editorial work, but you are interested in marketing or you're interested in acquisition, sometimes internships can give you a bit more experience in those different areas. And once you're in the door in an organization, I think it definitely helps to have those connections. Even if that's not where you land in your career, they often open the doors for other organizations, just references and that kind of thing.
I will say I think people tend to think about, okay, I'm going to have to move to New York to work for a major publisher, which if you want to do that, there are opportunities. Most of the major publishers' websites have job listings on them. They have portals where you can apply to high-level jobs, mid-level jobs, or entry-level jobs. But there are also a ton of small and independent presses scattered all over the country. So if there's a location you want to go to, or if there is a particular field of study that you want to possibly look at, working in those kind of books, look for independent presses and see if they might be hiring, because, there are all kinds, and you don't have to necessarily graduate, move to New York and, work as an associate entry-level position at Penguin or something like that. There are lots of opportunities, and the book world, the publishing world is pretty small. It seems big when you get into it, but then you'll find that, I've actually worked with this person's, editor, or this person's agent, or whatever the case may be. So that kind of just looking at different positions that are available at different presses will give you an idea of what's out there, and what kind of jobs there are that you may not even know about. Like, I kind of fell into this position and didn't know this was a job, and have really learned a lot about the different kinds of jobs that exist in publishing. And things like that. So I would say if you Google publishing jobs, you'll come up with websites that have listings for different publishers. And then of course, there are also independent publicity companies and things like that, like mine, where they're not connected to a publisher, but they are still in the publishing sphere.
This is all great. So the questions are coming in fast and furious. First, a message. Thank you all very much for this. I imagine that if you are also a writer that works for a publishing house, you have to go through the same process to get your own book published. However, is it somewhat easier to publish your book while working in this field, or is it smarter not to mix your art with where you work? Lacey, I feel like this is one that you could knock out of the park.
I mean, I don't have a book published yet. Knock on wood, we'll see. But I think it really depends on kind of what you are looking for. I think it will certainly give you working within publishing. If you're a writer and your intention is to publish a book, will give you a greater fluency with aspects of the publishing industry that I think are otherwise pretty lack a lot of transparency. Like publishing is a huge transparency issue, among other things. And if you're on the inside, you have, I think, just greater fluency in kind of the process and, what is an acquisition? What is an auction? What does it mean if I'm, have competing editors, things like this, and how to advocate for yourself. That said, you also kind of see how the sausage is made, and, you might lose your taste for sausages after that. And so I think it really just depends on you and kind of, what you have the stomach for.
Great. And Rebecca, I know you've published some on the academic side, so I don't know if it would be similar that way, different.
Sorry, I had a little emergency. I told you it's just putting out fires. This job all the time. No, can we move on? I'm so sorry.
Not a problem at all.
Yeah,
not a problem at all. So.
Yeah.
Another question that came in that I think is a really helpful one. Is a graduate degree required to get into publishing, or just a bachelor's?
Well,
No, you certainly don't.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say, so I will actually be helpful. I apologize. So I would say no. I mean, it's not, I think, and actually I wanted to just chime in as well, because this is related to the sort of question about getting started, right? And I absolutely reinforce everything about, an internship can be helpful and foot in the door. I think, it's really hard because, as you're hearing a lot of, right, we did sort of, look into, working in publishing, given where we happened to end up, and we didn't necessarily foresee it being a site where lots of publishing opportunities would be. I mean, I am sort of pro thinking in terms of translatable skills, right? I work in university press publishing. It's a nonprofit publisher, and the fact that I had nonprofit administrative experience was really valuable and part of what helped me get my current role. So I am, there is the sort of realism of geography too, and looking around at what's in front of you and taking some heart and knowing that internships may not be readily available, for a wide number of reasons, and knowing that, sectors are big and broad, and skills that can pay off later can be developed in a lot of different contexts, and a lot of, one's path is figuring out how to sort of sell oneself in different ways along the line and kind of repackage your background in history. So, I mean, I'm listening to Lacey talk and I'm like, ooh, how can I get your job? So I second that, kind of like always still figuring things out at different stages. Now I've totally wandered off from the actual question because I wanted to go back to that other thing, but I feel like I sort of answered it along the way.
I think you answered it beautifully. And it seems to me, and maybe this is another way to.
Oh no, you don't need to agree.
Right.
That was it. Yeah.
It seems like there isn't one specific degree that's like the silver bullet to getting into publishing, right? If we've heard anything today, it's that it's the myriad of experiences that you kind of, and the way that you package them, which is why everyone that's on this call and listening, you should make a chance or set up an appointment with Danica so she can walk you through your resume and you can get those things, right? If, you know, sometimes it's the nonprofit work, sometimes it's the teaching work, but it seems like it knits those things together really, really nicely. We do have a really nuts and bolts question about freelancing, and this is, what pay scale should freelancers use when charging for copy editing services?
Okay, I think that one's on me to answer, and I actually feel a little bad that I brought up freelancing because you can freelance, but the people who are most successful at freelancing are the ones who have a partner or other person in their life that has the high paying job with the benefits and all of the rest of it. It is actually quite difficult. And I've got a full-time job and I freelance on the side. It is actually quite difficult to make a real living solely as a freelancer. There are times when you have too much work and times when you have really lean, not enough work, and you got to try to, make that budget work. And rates vary considerably depending on the sort of copy editing that you're doing. So if you're in, copy editing books or journals, the pay is okay, but not incredible. If you're copy editing hardcore medical, science, legal, technical material, then the pay is considerably better. But like I say, I mean, as a freelancer, you still have to worry about things like health insurance and retirement and other sorts of benefits. How are you going to have time off? Are you going to work extra some week, or are you just going to have essentially a pay cut because you want to take a vacation? And those are all things that are very challenging to manage, because at that point you're not just copy editing, but you're also running a business too. You've got to worry about taxes. I mean, I just had to pay estimated taxes last week, and it's like, oh right, that's a thing I also have to do because I've got this business on the side. So that's the caveat for having brought up freelance in the first place. In answer to your question, I would say that in this day and age, an experienced copy editor probably shouldn't accept work for less than $35 to $40 an hour. But realistically, there are plenty of places that would pay you less than that, and plenty of places that are not going to grant that budget to you. And there are plenty of copy editors out there who do work for less than that. So I just want to make sure that that's totally clear, that the pay, it depends a little bit. It's maybe not great, and there's lots of things to think about with freelance copy editing work. But in terms of, I brought it up because in terms of gaining a little bit of experience to be able to tailor a resume to a place where you're interested in maybe going into project editing or going into manuscript editorial and copy editing, it can be helpful to show experience above and beyond just proofreading a friend's paper for a college class. So that was kind of the spirit in which I brought it up. Hope that helps a little bit.
Thanks, that's great. So there is a question about agents, and I'm going to table that one for right now since I don't have an agent on my panel, but stay tuned. We'll see if the Humanities Center can offer something that can tell you how to get an agent. We'll see. And I'm going to cut off the questions now, but I'd like to ask, there's two that are kind of the same, so I'm going to read them together. And I think it will, they kind of get to the same space. The first is, if we can't get an internship at a publishing company, where should we go next for something still in the same field as publishing? And along with that, there's a second question. I'm a first-year musicology master's student here at WVU, and I was wondering if you have any recommendations for someone who wants experience in this area, but also can't afford time to do this full-time, and said, I guess if you have any recommendations for someone who is approaching this in the scope of a different degree. So what I'm getting from both these questions are, what are some strategies on the way in to gain some experience that might lead to a career in publishing?
I'm
happy to, please
sorry.
go ahead.
I will say for me, since my job is in marketing, that can come from a variety of different places. I do PR for books, but if the musicology department has, social media programs and they need somebody to run those, that would be a skill that I would look at, and say, okay, well, they could translate those skills into helping with our social media, helping with authors' social media, or, if they're really good, if they're in a writing program, that's something that can translate into, writing press releases for authors and things like that. So think about what you're passionate about and think about what's available to you realistically, what's out there, what it's not going to be, what's something that you can do, and think about, okay, is there, something in publishing that this skill set would translate into, and you may not always know. So ask. It sounds like you guys have a great deal of resources at your fingertips, which is wonderful. Say, hey, I'm wanting to get into publishing after I do this, and I'm wondering if this internship if there are any skills that would look good on my resume from this internship, because there probably are. It just may not be perfectly in line with how you thought of it, but that doesn't mean there's nothing out there that, it doesn't necessarily have to be in editing or in publishing or writing or whatever. There's a lot of different things you can do. I worked in journalism, and a lot of those skills translated perfectly to marketing and publicity.
Yeah, and I think just to build on to what Ellen said, I think one of the beautiful things about the humanities is that those skills are so transferable. And I think it really is about the story and the narrative that you're telling about your own work experience and your own career. And that story doesn't have to be the same story for the entirety of your life, or even as you're applying, in the same month to 2 different jobs, right? And so I think it really is, thinking about, what is the narrative you're telling about the skills and the experiences that you have that have given you those skills. And I think, one thing I would also note is that, in creative fields, in the humanities, in the arts, there is a lot that you can do for very little pay or for free. And I think, that is definitely complicated, and it does create equity issues. I have a lot of challenges with the idea of unpaid internships for that very reason. It makes things very inequitable. It keeps those gates very high and prevents the industry from being as rich and diverse and as it could be and as it needs to be. But if that is something that is available to you or that you're interested in, there are certainly no shortage of opportunities that you can do for free. I volunteer a lot of time, working with a couple of lit journals, for example, and I do it because I enjoy it. And I'm good at it, but I do that going into it knowing that I'm not getting compensated, and so I think you also can find opportunities like that if that's of interest to you and something that is sustainable for you as well.
All right. Any last things on that question? Well, I really just want to say thank you truly to our panel today. What a rich discussion and just really helpful for our students to hear. So thank you. If you want to put your hand clap emoji up, I know that's a thing, so please feel free, since we can't be filling the room with our claps. But I want to let folks know that are here that this is one of a series that we're going to be doing, and to please mark your calendars for the future Humanities at Work sessions, the next of which is coming up pretty quickly here on October 4th at 4 p.m. at the Downtown Library, lower level, classroom 136. And you can see all the Humanities at Work events by enrolling in Handshake through Career Services or at the events page at humanitiescenter.usu.edu. www.wvu.edu. I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank the panelists again. What a rich and wonderful discussion. I really appreciate it. And I want to wish you all a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much.